The morning sun glinted off the Blackwood Tower, 70 stories of steel and glass that pierced the city skyline like a monument to ambition itself. At its summit, Alexander Mercer surveyed his domain with cold, calculating eyes. At 43, he had amassed a fortune that made nations tremble, built on the ruins of companies he had systematically dismantled and absorbed. "The Clayton merger is finalized," his assistant said, sliding a document across the polished obsidian desk. Their board had no choice. Alexander barely acknowledged her presence, his attention caught by the street below. A young woman exited a small bakery, her brown hair gathered in a simple ponytail, flour dusting her apron. Something about her casual grace made him pause. "Who is that?" he asked, gesturing toward the window. His assistant looked confused. "Sir, the Clayton family is expecting your call to discuss." "Not Clayton," Alexander snapped. "The bakery. Who owns it?" Within an hour, a dossier landed on his desk. The bakery had been there for decades, a family business that somehow survived the economic typhoon he had engineered to clear the block for his next development. Its stubborn existence was an irritation he had overlooked. Until now. "Tilo," chimed softly as Alexander entered Hartman's bakery the next morning, looking jarringly out of place in his bespoke suit. The aroma of fresh bread enveloped him, unfamiliar and oddly comforting. "Can I help you?" The woman from yesterday stood behind the counter, her name tag reading Eliza. Her smile wavered slightly at the sight of him, as though she recognized predatory wealth when she saw it. "Coffee black," Alexander said, deliberately scanning the small space. "Quaint operation you have here." "We've been here 46 years, Eliza replied, her tone carrying unexpected steel beneath its warmth. "My grandfather started it. Coffee's $3. Alexander placed a $100 bill on the counter. "Keep the change. Consider it a donation to whatever this is." Her eyes flashed. "We don't need donations, we need customers who respect what we do." She pushed the bill back across the counter. "Your coffee's on the house today. But next time, bring exact change and a better attitude." For perhaps the first time in his adult life, Alexander Mercer was speechless. As he left, coffee untouched. The peculiar feeling in his chest wasn't anger. It was fascination. He had built his empire on identifying weaknesses, but Eliza Hartman seemed to have none he recognized. In his office that afternoon, he canceled 3 meetings and stared at the bakery's property assessment. One signature would begin the process of destroying it. Instead, he found himself researching artisanal baking traditions, an inexplicable detour that lasted into the night. When his assistant entered, concern etched on her face, she found him watching security footage from the bakery's street. On screen, Eliza locked up, then stopped to give half her sandwich to a homeless man before walking away into the evening light. "Sir? The Tokyo investors are waiting." Alexander's jaw tightened. "Tell them something came up. I need to rethink our strategy for the West Side development." As darkness fell over the city, 2 worlds had begun an unexpected collision course. The man who had everything but felt nothing, and the woman who had little but gave much. Neither could have predicted the devastation that would follow. Alexander returned to Hartman's bakery daily for 2 weeks. Each morning, he absorbed Eliza's world. The elderly customers she knew by name, her swift efficiency in crisis, her unguarded laugh. He learned she worked 16-hour days to keep the bakery afloat after her father's stroke, that she had abandoned art school to take over the family business, that beneath her flour-dusted exterior lay an intellect that challenged his own. "You're becoming a regular," Eliza remarked on the 15th day, sliding his coffee across the counter. "Still haven't figured out why a man who owns half the skyline spends his mornings in my little shop." Alexander straightened his tie. "Perhaps I appreciate authenticity." "Authenticity?" Eliza laughed. "Is that what your kind calls slumming it these days?" Her directness both wounded and intrigued him. In his world, people performed calculated deference. Eliza offered only unvarnished truth. "Have dinner with me tonight," he said suddenly. Eliza's eyebrows rose. I close at 8. 8:30 then. I'll send a car. She wiped her hands on her apron. I can drive myself, thanks. And it's just dinner, Mr. Mercer, not a merger. That evening, Alexander waited at Stellaris, the exclusive restaurant atop his hotel. When Eliza arrived in a simple blue dress, he watched the maitre d' nearly refuse her entry until he intervened. The other diners stared openly as she crossed the room, a commoner among aristocracy. You look uncomfortable, Alexander observed after ordering wine without consulting her. I am. Eliza glanced around. This isn't exactly my scene. It could be. The words escaped before he could filter them. Her eyes narrowed. What does that mean? Alexander leaned forward. Your bakery sits on land worth millions. You work yourself to exhaustion for pennies when you could sell and live comfortably. That bakery is my heritage, she replied, voice tight. Not everything valuable can be quantified in dollars. Everything has a price, he countered. You're sacrificing your talents, your future. You know nothing about my talents or future, Eliza interrupted. That bakery feeds families who remember when bread was shared, not hoarded. It's the last place on that street where people matter more than profit margins. Their conversation spiraled through the evening, him arguing rational economics, her defending human connection. Yet beneath their philosophical clash, something electric flowed. Her conviction awakened something dormant in him. Respect. As his chauffeur drove her home, Alexander made a decision that would forever alter his trajectory. The next morning, he canceled the West Side development project, forgetting the predator he had always been in his fascination with this woman who refused to become prey. His board was outraged. His investors threatened revolt. Alexander, for the first time, did not care. You're jeopardizing everything for some baker? His CFO demanded during an emergency meeting. I'm reconsidering our approach, Alexander replied coolly, but inside confusion reigned. He had built his fortune by destroying sentiment, by seeing people as pawns. Now he found himself protecting a bakery because a woman's smile had somehow breached his defenses. When he arrived at Hartman's the following day, Eliza was waiting. Your assistant called my father, she said, eyes flashing. Offered to buy our building for twice market value. After you canceled your development? What game are you playing? No game, Alexander replied, suddenly uncertain. I thought that I'd be grateful? That my principles were for sale just at a higher price? Her voice trembled. I misjudged you. I thought there might be a human being under that designer suit. As she turned away, Alexander caught her arm. Eliza, please. Don't touch me, she whispered. You see the world as something to possess. I'm not another acquisition. When she was gone, he stood alone in the morning light, tasting an unfamiliar emotion. Shame. The great Alexander Mercer, who had dismantled corporations without remorse, was unraveling over a rejection from a baker with flour-dusted hands. For 38 days, Alexander sought to reach Eliza. His calls echoed into voicemail oblivion. His carefully selected orchids were returned, their delicate petals bruised from the journey back. The bakery's vintage blinds remained stubbornly, drawn whenever his distinctive black Bentley appeared on the street. Though his corporate empire continued to function with mechanical precision, a testament to the ruthlessly efficient machine he had constructed, he, its architect and master, found himself increasingly fixated on the absence of someone who existed entirely outside his sphere of influence. The Blackwood Tower's executive floor operated in hushed tones as Alexander's temper grew increasingly volatile. Board meetings became battlegrounds where the slightest disagreement might trigger his wrath. 3 senior executives resigned within a week. You've lost focus, remarked Victor Chen one evening, swirling 20-year-old Macallan in a crystal tumbler. They sat in Alexander's penthouse, 60 floors above the city's glittering landscape. As his oldest friend and legal counsel, Victor alone could speak such truths without fear of retribution. I've watched you dismantle billion-dollar enterprises without the slightest hesitation. I've seen you ruin men's lives over breakfast and sleep soundly that same night. Now you're languishing over a woman who sells sourdough for a living? This isn't merely unlike you, Alexander. It's becoming dangerous. Alexander stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows, his silhouette sharp against the night sky. She sees through me, Victor. No artifice, no hidden agenda. Do you know how rare that is in our world? Everyone has an agenda, Victor countered, his reflection appearing beside Alexander's in the glass. Perhaps you've simply not discovered hers? Have you considered that her rejection might be calculated? The surest way to capture a collector's interest is to remain just beyond his reach. The suggestion lingered like slow-acting poison in Alexander's mind. That night, after Victor departed, he stood in his private study contemplating a weathered photograph of his father. The man who had taught him that power was the only true currency and vulnerability was merely weakness by another name. "What would you do?" he whispered to the stern face that had never shown him affection. The answer came with brutal clarity. Control the situation by any means necessary. At 2:17 a.m., Alexander made a call to Marcus Reeves, the shadow operative who had unearthed countless corporate secrets for him over the years. A man whose methods were effective precisely because they operated beyond legal and ethical boundaries. "Find everything on Eliza Hartman," he ordered, voice cold with renewed purpose. "Family history, financial records, personal weaknesses, every detail no matter how insignificant. I want to know her better than she knows herself." 7 days. Later, a comprehensive file arrived via encrypted channel. Alexander dismissed his staff, locked his office doors, and immersed himself in Eliza's life. What he discovered beneath the bakery's quaint facade was financial devastation. Medical bills from her father's stroke had drained their modest savings to the last cent. 3 bank loans had been denied in the past month alone. The building itself, designated a historical property in 1986, had serious structural issues that would require funds the Hartmans simply didn't possess. Most revealing was a journal entry photographed from Eliza's personal notebook. "Dad's condition worsening. Dr. Brennan recommends specialized care we can't afford. Considering night shifts at Memorial Hospital. Cannot lose this place. It's all that remains of our family legacy. Will not let this break me." Power surged through Alexander again, the familiar intoxication of holding someone's fate in his manicured hands. This was the language he understood, the leverage point he needed. A predatory smile formed as he drafted acquisition papers for the entire block, including contingencies specifically designed to pressure the Hartman property. The following morning, dressed immaculately in a charcoal Tom Ford suit, Alexander strode into Hartman's bakery during what his surveillance had identified as their slowest hour. The bell's cheerful chime contrasted sharply with the tension that immediately filled the space. Eliza froze behind the counter, a smudge of flour accentuating her cheekbone. "We're closed," she said, though the hand-painted sign clearly read, "Open." "I have a proposition." He placed a leather portfolio on the counter between them. "Your father's medical debt, cleared entirely. Funds for comprehensive renovations. A business partnership that preserves this establishment while making it financially viable for generations to come." Her eyes narrowed, suspicious. "In exchange for what?" "Time," he replied simply. "Dinner once a week. Your perspective on certain matters, that's all I ask." "You investigated me." Her voice dropped to a dangerous whisper, hands gripping the countertop until her knuckles whitened. "You looked into my private struggles, my father's illness, so you could exploit them for, what, my company, my compliance?" "I looked because I care," he countered, leaning forward. "This isn't exploitation, it's assistance. What difference does the motivation make if the outcome benefits you?" "The difference is everything." Her eyes flashed with indignation. "From where I stand, it looks like calculated manipulation. Did you think my principles would crumble under financial pressure? That I'd be so pathetically grateful I'd overlook who you fundamentally are?" "And who am I?" he demanded, genuine confusion bleeding into his irritation. "A man who destroys things because he can't understand their true value," she answered without hesitation. who believes everything and everyone has a price, that enough pressure applied in the right places will yield whatever he desires. You collect companies the way others collect art, without concern for the lives affected. Her words sliced through his practiced veneer. For a fleeting moment, vulnerability flickered across his features, so brief she might have imagined it. Behind her, the bakery's ancient oven timer chimed softly. "I've never claimed to be a good man," Alexander said quietly, uncharacteristic, uncertainty tempering his usual arrogance. "But I'm trying to be different, better. By investigating my family? By leveraging my father's illness?" Eliza shook her head, disappointment evident in her expression. "That's not change, Alexander. That's just finding new tactics to get what you want." She pushed the portfolio back across the counter, refusing even to open it. "I'd rather lose this bakery than compromise what it stands for. Please leave. Don't come back." As Alexander stepped onto the street, sunlight harsh after the bakery's warm glow, his phone vibrated. Marcus Reeves had sent additional information. Thomas Hartman's condition was deteriorating rapidly. Specialized medical expenses would exceed $300,000 annually. Foreclosure proceedings would begin within 3 months. A competitor, Transcontinental Developments, had already made inquiries about the property. Alexander stood motionless on the sidewalk, pedestrians flowing around him like water around stone. For the first time in his adult life, he struggled to reconcile his instincts with an unfamiliar voice emerging from some long-dormant corner of his conscience. That night, sequestered in his office while rain lashed against panoramic windows, Alexander made 2 calls that would fundamentally alter his trajectory. The first ensured that anonymous donations would cover Thomas Hartman's medical care indefinitely, with provisions for experimental treatments and home nursing staff. The second transferred ownership of the bakery building to a trust with Eliza, named as beneficiary, no strings attached, no mention of his involvement, with additional funds allocated for renovation and business expansion. Victor was apoplectic when he discovered the transactions. "You've given away prime real estate valued at $17 million to a woman who explicitly rejected you? The board will have legitimate grounds to question your competence." "I'm doing what's right," Alexander replied, the unfamiliar words sounding strange even to his own ears. "Right?" Victor scoffed, incredulous. "Since when has right factored into your business decisions? This isn't philanthropy, Alexander, it's obsession, and it will destroy everything you've built." Later, alone in his penthouse sanctuary, Alexander stood before his father's portrait. "You would call this weakness," he acknowledged. "Perhaps you'd be correct." For the first time in decades, he slept without dreaming of acquisition or conquest or the endless expansion of his empire. Instead, he dreamed of flour-dusted hands and uncompromising eyes that had somehow penetrated his carefully constructed armor to glimpse the hollow man beneath. As dawn broke over the skyline, a text message illuminated his phone screen. From Eliza. "I know what you did. We need to talk." The cafe overlooking Central Park was neutral territory. Neither the bakery, that was Eliza's domain, nor the sleek corporate settings where Alexander reigned. Rain tapped against the windows as they sat across from each other, steam rising from untouched cups. "Why did you do it?" Eliza asked, her voice barely audible above the ambient cafe noise. "The trust fund, my father's medical care, all anonymously. You didn't even try to use it as leverage." Alexander studied her face, searching for the right words, unfamiliar territory for a man accustomed to dictating terms rather than explaining them. "Because you were right about me," he admitted finally. "I've spent my life believing everything has a price, that people are ultimately transactional. You showed me something different. And this grand gesture erases decades of ruthlessness." Her tone wasn't accusatory, merely questioning. "No," Alexander replied with unexpected candor. "Nothing erases the past, but perhaps it begins a different future." Their conversation stretched for hours as rain turned to mist, and then to evening clarity. Alexander revealed fragments of his childhood. A father who measured love in achievements, a mother who disappeared when he was 8, the gradual calcification of his heart behind walls of ambition and acquisition. "You built an empire by destroying others," Eliza observed as shadows lengthened across their table. "I did," he acknowledged. "I told myself it was merely business, natural selection in an economic ecosystem. I never allowed myself to see the human cost." As they parted that evening, something tentative had formed between them. Not forgiveness exactly, but a fragile bridge spanning their disparate worlds. Over the following months, Alexander began a transformation that stunned the business world. The predatory tactics that had defined Mercer Enterprises gave way to sustainable investments and ethical business practices. His board revolted. Shareholders threatened legal action. Victor Chen resigned in protest. "You're committing corporate suicide," Victor warned during their final meeting. "This woman has bewitched you into destroying everything we built." "What we built was hollow," Alexander replied. "I'm trying to create something worth preserving." As winter yielded to spring, Alexander and Eliza's relationship blossomed cautiously. She remained skeptical of his transformation, but couldn't deny its authenticity. The bakery, now structurally sound and financially secure, expanded its community, programs under her guidance. Alexander often volunteered there, his expensive suits exchanged for simple shirts and jeans, learning to create rather than consume. The financial press dubbed it Mercer's madness, when he declined a hostile takeover that would have added billions to his worth but cost thousands their jobs. Yet for every detractor, allies emerged, ethical investors, community leaders, employees, who witnessed his evolution from tyrant to advocate. On a crisp autumn evening a year after their first meeting, Alexander took Eliza to the rooftop garden he had created atop the Blackwood Tower, a green sanctuary amid urban steel. "I have something to show you," he said, leading her to a small greenhouse. Inside, rare botanical specimens thrived, including a delicate orchid variant thought extinct. It took researchers years to revive this species. They named it Second Chance. Eliza touched the luminous petals gently. "It's beautiful. Like you, it survives against impossible odds," Alexander said softly. "I thought nothing could change me, Eliza. I was wrong." As their relationship deepened, so did the opposition to Alexander's transformed business philosophy. Former allies became enemies. Competitors sensed weakness. Victor Chen, now heading a rival firm, orchestrated a coordinated attack on Mercer Enterprises' vulnerabilities. The crisis hit on a rainy Tuesday. Alexander was volunteering at the bakery when his phone exploded with alerts. A sophisticated cyber attack had breached his company's systems, exposing controversial acquisitions from his ruthless past while simultaneously triggering a stock collapse. Years of buried secrets, legal but damning, surfaced in a perfectly timed exposé. "It's Victor," Alexander told Eliza as they watched his empire crumble on the bakery's small television. "He's using my past to destroy my present." "Will you fight back?" she asked quietly. The old Alexander would have launched immediate counterattacks, leveraging every dirty secret he possessed about his enemies. Instead, he made a different choice. "No," he said. "Fighting would mean becoming that person again." Within weeks, Mercer Enterprises was dismantled. The board ousted him. His fortune diminished by billions. The press swarmed like vultures, celebrating the fall of a titan known for toppling others. On the day Alexander cleared his office, Eliza waited outside Blackwood Tower. Together, they walked through the financial district, past buildings he once owned, toward an uncertain future. "I lost everything," he said as they reached the Hudson River. "Everything I spent my life building." Eliza took his hand. "Not everything." 6 months later, a small ethical investment firm opened in a renovated brownstone. Alexander Mercer, once the most feared man in finance, now focused on funding community businesses and sustainable technologies. His client list was modest, his office simple, his goals transformed. The bakery continued to thrive, now a neighborhood institution offering apprenticeships to disadvantaged youth. Eliza and Alexander created a foundation using the remains of his fortune, focused on medical care for families facing catastrophic illness. On the anniversary of his corporate collapse, Alexander stood outside the bakery at closing time, watching Eliza through the window as she taught a teenage apprentice the art of bread making. Her patience, her generosity, her unwavering principles, these were the qualities that had undone his empire, and, in doing so, saved his soul. As snow began to fall, Alexander understood the cosmic irony of his journey. In losing his kingdom, he had found his humanity. The cruel billionaire had died so the man could live. The consequences of his past would always shadow him. But for the first time in his life, Alexander Mercer walked toward the future without the weight of emptiness. The price of redemption had been everything he once valued, and it was worth every penny.
The sterile, antiseptic smell of the hospital room invaded Garrett's senses as he blinked against the harsh fluorescent light. His body felt weak, as though he had been hollowed out and left adrift. A soft beeping punctuated the air, the sound of a heart monitor reminding him of the narrow escape he'd just had. Garrett Carter, a man who had built an empire with his iron will and unmatched instincts, was suddenly at the mercy of his own fragile body. He shifted slightly, grimacing at the dull ache in his chest. His hand instinctively moved toward the source of his discomfort, brushing against the hospital gown that felt unfamiliar and confining. Before he could gather his thoughts, the door opened quietly, and a young nurse entered the room. Her presence was calm but purposeful. "Good to see you're awake, Mr. Carter," she said, her voice carrying a warmth that momentarily cut through the sterile atmosphere. Garrett studied her, noting her composed demeanor and sharp eyes. "How bad was it?" he asked, his voice rasping from disuse. "You had a heart attack," the nurse replied, adjusting his IV drip with practiced precision. "A severe one. But you're lucky. If the paramedics hadn't gotten to you so quickly, the outcome could have been—" She hesitated, then offered a reassuring smile. "Let's just say, it's a good thing you're here." He frowned, frustration flickering across his face. "Lucky? Sure." His voice carried a trace of bitterness. He had spent his life preparing for battles in the boardroom, not fights for survival against his own body. The nurse paused, her expression turning serious. "Mr. Carter, I know it's not my place, but you need to rest. Stress is what brought you here, and it will keep you here if you're not careful." Garrett waved a dismissive hand, as if brushing off her concern. "Rest isn't an option. I've got a company to run." The nurse's gaze didn't falter. "Your health has to come first. Pushing yourself too hard again might mean there won't be a company or a you to worry about." The weight of her words hung in the air, but Garrett remained silent, unwilling to acknowledge the truth she'd just spoken. As she finished adjusting the equipment, she hesitated by the door, as if debating whether to say something else. Finally, she turned back, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "Mr. Carter, one more thing." Her tone was cautious, almost conspiratorial. "I overheard something while you were unconscious. You shouldn't go to your board meeting tomorrow. Something isn't right." Garrett's brows knitted in confusion, then annoyance. "What are you talking about?" She hesitated again, clearly reluctant to elaborate. "Just be careful. Some things are more dangerous than they seem." Before Garrett could press her for more, she was gone, the door clicking softly shut behind her. He stared after her, the cryptic warning gnawing at him. The tension in his chest wasn't just physical anymore. Her words left a lingering unease, one that didn't fade even as he tried to dismiss it. Garrett stared at the blank ceiling above him, his mind racing despite his body's sluggish protests. The nurse's warning was absurd. What could a young hospital worker possibly know about corporate dealings? Yet there was something about the way she spoke, firm yet hesitant, as if she knew more than she let on. It irked him, that unfamiliar feeling of being left in the dark, especially when it came to his company. He reached for his phone on the bedside table, ignoring the dull pain in his chest as he leaned forward. The screen lit up with a flood of notifications, missed calls, emails, and messages from board members and senior staff. A text from Dexter, his COO, stood out. "We've got everything under control. Rest up and don't worry about the meeting tomorrow. I'll handle it." Garrett's lips tightened into a thin line. Dexter's tone was reassuring, but Garrett knew him well enough to sense something else beneath the surface, an eagerness, perhaps even relief, that Garrett might be absent. That wasn't like Dexter. He was dependable, yes, but never the type to take charge unless absolutely necessary. His instincts, honed by decades of navigating cutthroat business environments, told him something wasn't right, and Garrett Carter had never been a man to ignore his instincts. The door creaked open again, breaking his train of thought. This time, a middle-aged man in a white coat entered, his demeanor a mix of professionalism and weariness. "Good evening, Mr. Carter. I'm Dr. Patel. I've been overseeing your care." The doctor's voice was calm but authoritative. He gestured to the chart in his hands. "I trust Nurse Elodie has already briefed you on your condition." Garrett nodded curtly. "She did, and I'm fine. When can I be discharged?" Dr. Patel raised an eyebrow, clearly unimpressed by Garrett's bluntness. "You're stable for now, but fine is not the word I'd use to describe your condition. A heart attack like yours doesn't just happen. It's the result of years of stress, poor habits, and ignoring the warning signs." "I'm not here for a lecture, Doctor," Garrett replied, his tone sharp. "I need to get back to work." Dr. Patel sighed, setting the chart aside. "And that's precisely why you're here now, instead of in a boardroom. Mr. Carter, you're playing with fire. If you push yourself again, there may not be a next time." Garrett didn't respond, his jaw tightening in frustration. The doctor's words mirrored Elodie's earlier warning, but he refused to let his company run itself into the ground in his absence. "Look," Dr. Patel continued, softening his tone slightly, "I can't force you to stay, but I strongly advise against leaving until we've run a few more tests. If nothing else, give yourself one more day to recover. You'll be no good to anyone, yourself or your company, if you're dead." The bluntness of the statement hit harder than Garrett wanted to admit. He exhaled slowly, nodding reluctantly. "Fine. One day." The doctor gave a small, satisfied smile. "Good. Rest tonight and we'll reassess in the morning." As Dr. Patel left, Garrett's gaze drifted to the faint outline of the city skyline visible through the window. The nurse's words echoed in his mind. "You shouldn't go to your board meeting." Something isn't right. What could she have overheard? His staff was loyal, at least as far as he knew. Still, Dexter's unusual message, the financial troubles that had been plaguing the company for months, and now this cryptic warning all felt like pieces of a larger puzzle. He clenched his fist, his resolve hardening. Rest could wait. Whatever was happening at Carter Technologies, he needed to uncover it, and fast. The early morning sunlight streamed through the towering glass windows of Carter Technologies headquarters, casting long shadows across the marble floors of the executive lobby. Garrett stepped out of the elevator, his stride purposeful, despite the lingering ache in his chest. The nurse's warning and Dr. Patel's advice replayed in his mind, but he pushed them aside. There was no room for doubt, not when his company, his life's work, was at stake. The receptionist, a young woman who barely looked old enough to rent an apartment, greeted him with wide eyes. "Mr. Carter, we weren't expecting you today," she stammered, scrambling to collect herself. Garrett offered her a curt nod. "Clearly," he muttered, glancing around the lobby. The atmosphere was off, tense, quieter than usual. Employees moved about with their heads down, avoiding eye contact as though afraid of being noticed. Garrett's eyes narrowed. The normally bustling energy of the place had been replaced by an undercurrent of unease. He made his way to his private elevator, swiping his access card and punching in the code. The doors slid shut with a soft hum, isolating him from the disquiet outside. The ascent to the top floor felt slower than usual, each floor number lighting up like a silent countdown. Garrett tightened his grip on the polished handrail, his instincts screaming that something was wrong. As the doors opened to the executive floor, the first face he saw was Dexter's. The COO was standing near the corner office, speaking in hushed tones to Clara, the senior board member. Their conversation cut off abruptly as they noticed Garrett's arrival. Dexter's surprise was evident, but he recovered quickly, plastering on a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Garrett, what are you doing here? You're supposed to be resting," Dexter said, stepping forward as though to guide him back into the elevator. Garrett ignored the gesture, his eyes darting to Clara, who seemed momentarily flustered before regaining her usual poise. "I decided my health can wait," he replied dryly, brushing past Dexter and heading toward his office. "What's going on? You two looked like you were plotting a coup." Dexter laughed nervously, falling into step behind him. "Nothing of the sort. Just routine matters. I was updating Clara on the status of a few contracts." Garrett stopped abruptly, turning to face them both. His sharp gaze bore into Dexter. "What contracts? I thought I made it clear we're freezing new deals until we stabilize the company's finances." Clara's perfectly manicured hands clasped together as she stepped in smoothly. "Garrett, let's not get ahead of ourselves. Dexter has been handling things well in your absence. We've made a few strategic moves to keep things afloat." Garrett's jaw tightened, but he forced a thin smile. "I'd like to review those strategic moves. Schedule a meeting with the full board. Today." Dexter hesitated, exchanging a glance with Clara, but Garrett's tone left no room for argument. "Of course," Dexter said quickly. "I'll handle it." As they dispersed, Garrett entered his office, closing the door firmly behind him. The familiar space, with its sleek design and panoramic view of the city, felt colder than usual. He sat at his desk and opened his laptop, pulling up the company's financial records. Hours slipped by as he pored over spreadsheets, searching for irregularities. Garrett's eyes scanned line after line of numbers, his mind working tirelessly to piece together a narrative from the data. The company's finances, once robust and meticulously organized, showed signs of tampering. Funds were being funneled into vague accounts labeled with innocuous names like Strategic Reserve and Operational Contingencies. The sums weren't astronomical, but they were frequent and suspiciously consistent. Too consistent to be coincidental. A knock at the door pulled him from his thoughts. He looked up as Sophia Tran, the young intern he had noticed on several occasions, stepped hesitantly inside. She held a folder close to her chest, her expression a mixture of nervousness and determination. "Mr. Carter, I'm sorry to disturb you," she began, her voice trembling slightly. "But I think there's something you need to see." Garrett leaned back in his chair, gesturing for her to come closer. "Close the door behind you," he said, his tone firm but not unkind. Sophia did as instructed, then placed the folder on his desk. "I've been working on some financial analysis for the operations team, and I noticed some discrepancies in the reports. At first, I thought it was just a mistake, but—" She hesitated, glancing at Garrett as if gauging his reaction. "The numbers don't add up, and there's a pattern. It looks like someone is trying to hide something." Garrett opened the folder, his eyes narrowing as he scanned the documents. They confirmed what he had suspected. Money was being siphoned off in a systematic way, hidden within layers of false reporting. But Sophia's analysis also revealed something he hadn't noticed. The transactions were tied to contracts with Pacific Innovate, a rival firm that had been circling Carter Technologies for months. "Where did you get these?" Garrett asked, his voice low and controlled. "I came across them while reconciling the operational budget," she replied. "I didn't know if I should bring it up, but I thought you should know." "You did the right thing," he said, his tone softening. "Have you shared this with anyone else?" She shook her head quickly. "No, sir. Just you." "Good. Keep it that way," Garrett instructed, closing the folder. "This stays between us for now." Sophia nodded, her expression relieved but still cautious. As she left the office, Garrett leaned back in his chair, the weight of the discovery settling on him. This wasn't just corporate mismanagement, it was sabotage, and the connections to Pacific Innovate made it clear that someone within the company was working against him. He reached for his phone, dialing Jack Donovan. The private investigator answered on the second ring. "Jack, it's Garrett. I need you to dig deeper into Dexter and Clara. Specifically, I want to know about any ties they have to Pacific Innovate." "On it," Jack replied without hesitation. "I'll get back to you as soon as I have something." As Garrett hung up, his gaze drifted to the city skyline beyond his office window. The pieces of the puzzle were starting to fall into place, but the picture they painted was darker than he'd anticipated. Someone was orchestrating a coordinated attack on his company, and it was coming from the people he trusted most. A soft chime from his laptop signaled a new email. He clicked it open, his heart sinking as he read the subject line. URGENT, Anonymous Whistleblower Report. The message was brief but chilling. "Do not trust your COO. He's been meeting with Pacific Innovate's executives in secret. There's more to come." Garrett closed the email, his jaw tightening. The warning wasn't just cryptic, it was personal. He didn't need another clue to know that Dexter's loyalty was compromised. The question was how deep the betrayal ran, and whether Garrett had enough time to stop it. He stood, his chest tightening, not from his heart condition this time, but from the weight of what lay ahead. There was no doubt anymore. The board meeting he had called would not just be a chance to address company issues. It would be a battlefield, and Garrett needed to be ready for war. Garrett sat in his dimly lit office, the city skyline casting long shadows through the expansive windows. The folder from Sophia lay open on his desk, the damning evidence it contained staring back at him like an accusation. He had spent decades building Carter Technologies into a powerhouse, but now cracks in the foundation threatened to bring it all down. And those cracks weren't caused by the market or competition. They came from within. The phone on his desk buzzed, breaking the heavy silence. He snatched it up. "Jack? It's me." Jack Donovan's gruff voice came through the line. "You were right to be suspicious. I've been digging into Dexter, and there's more dirt than I expected." "Go on," Garrett said, leaning forward. "Dexter's been meeting with Pacific Innovate's CFO on and off for the past 6 months. Looks like they've been working on something big, probably laying the groundwork for a merger or even a hostile takeover." Garrett's grip on the phone tightened. "A takeover? From my COO? The man who's supposed to have my back?" "It gets worse," Jack said grimly. "Clara's involved too. She's not just backing Dexter, she's funneling funds through side accounts to help grease the wheels. That's why your financials are such a mess." The words hit Garrett like a punch to the gut. He had trusted both of them, relied on them to steer the company during his absence. Now they were orchestrating its downfall. "Do you have proof?" Garrett asked, his voice low but steady. "Enough to start making their lives difficult," Jack replied. "But if you want to take them down for good, we'll need to find the smoking gun." Garrett nodded to himself, already formulating a plan. "Send me everything you have. I'll handle the rest." As he hung up, the weight of the betrayal settled over him like a heavy cloak. But there was no time for anger or despair. His enemies were moving, and he couldn't afford to fall behind. Garrett stood, pacing his office as he pieced together his next steps. Sophia had shown initiative and discretion in bringing him the financial discrepancies. She could be a valuable ally. Elodie, too, lingered in his thoughts. Her cryptic warning at the hospital had proven more accurate than he cared to admit. He needed people he could trust, and though their connections to him were tenuous, they had already proven their loyalty in ways Dexter and Clara never had. His thoughts were interrupted by a soft knock on the door. "Come in," he called. Elodie stepped inside, her expression a mix of hesitance and determination. "Mr. Carter, I thought you should know. I overheard something. It might be important." "Go on," he said, motioning for her to sit. "I was restocking supplies in the hospital lounge yesterday when Clara came in," she began. She was on her phone, talking to someone. She mentioned Pacific Innovate by name, and she said something about ensuring the board falls in line. I didn't catch much else. Garrett's eyes narrowed. Clara wasn't just involved, she was actively steering the conspiracy. "Thank you, Elodie. This confirms what I've already started piecing together." Elodie hesitated, then leaned forward. "Mr. Carter, is someone trying to take over your company?" Her question hung in the air, unspoken fears lingering between them. Garrett considered his response carefully. "Yes," he said finally, "and it's coming from people I trusted." Elodie's brow furrowed as she absorbed Garrett's words. "How can I help?" she asked, her voice steady despite the unease flickering in her eyes. Garrett studied her for a moment, weighing his options. She had already proven resourceful, and her willingness to step into this web of betrayal was something he couldn't ignore. "Stay close to Clara," he said finally. "If you hear or see anything else, I need to know immediately. But be careful. If she suspects you're involved, it could get messy." Elodie nodded, determination replacing her hesitation. "I'll do what I can." As she left the office, Garrett returned to his desk, his mind racing. Clara's mention of ensuring the board falls in line suggested the conspiracy was nearing a critical juncture. If Dexter and Clara were rallying the board against him, he had to act swiftly to regain control before the damage became irreversible. He reached for his phone again, dialing Sophia Tran this time. The intern answered on the second ring. "Mr. Carter," she said, her voice tinged with surprise. "Sophia, I need you to do something discreet," Garrett began. "I want a full audit of all recent board activity, emails, meetings, anything that might connect them to Pacific Innovate. Can you handle that?" Sophia hesitated, then said, "I'll do my best. It might take some time to access everything, though." "Do what you can," Garrett replied, "and don't let anyone know what you're working on." As he hung up, his resolve hardened. He couldn't wait for the board meeting he'd scheduled. He needed answers now. The stakes were too high to sit idle while his company slipped through his fingers. Later that afternoon, Garrett made his way to the boardroom. The large, imposing table stood empty, the high-backed chairs lined up like sentinels. He placed a stack of documents, Sophia's initial findings and Jack's reports, at the head of the table. This was the battleground, and he intended to be ready when the players arrived. Just as he finished organizing his papers, the door opened, and Dexter strode in, his expression one of cautious surprise. "Garrett, I didn't realize we had a meeting scheduled." "We don't," Garrett said, his tone as sharp as a knife. "But since you're here, let's talk." Dexter hesitated, then took a seat across from him. "What's on your mind?" Garrett leaned forward, his gaze piercing. "Pacific Innovate. Care to explain why your name keeps coming up in connection with them?" Dexter's face remained impassive, but Garrett caught the brief flicker of alarm in his eyes. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said smoothly. "I've had no dealings with Pacific Innovate." Garrett slammed a folder onto the table, the sound echoing through the empty room. "Don't lie to me, Dexter. I've got evidence. Meetings, financial transactions, even anonymous tips. You've been working against me, and I want to know why." For a moment, Dexter's composure faltered, but he quickly recovered, leaning back in his chair with a thin smile. "If you think I'm conspiring against you, prove it. Until then, I suggest you tread carefully. False accusations could make things difficult." The veiled threat hung in the air, but Garrett didn't flinch. "I don't need to prove anything yet," he said coldly. "But trust me, Dexter, when the truth comes out, there will be no place for you to hide." As Dexter left the room, Garrett felt a flicker of satisfaction. The man was rattled, and that meant Garrett was closing in. But the encounter also confirmed something else. Dexter wasn't working alone. Clara's involvement and her mention of the board suggested a deeper conspiracy, one that required more than brute force to dismantle. He picked up the phone once more, calling Jack. "I need you to expand the scope," he said. "Clara and Dexter aren't the only players. Dig into every board member. I need to know who's loyal and who's not." Jack's response was immediate. "Understood. I'll get on it." As Garrett hung up, he allowed himself a moment to exhale. The storm was gathering, but he wasn't going to be caught unprepared. Not this time. Clara Winters sat in her expansive corner office, her fingers drumming a calculated rhythm against the sleek mahogany desk. The sun cast long beams of light across the room, but her focus was elsewhere, fixed on the spreadsheet glowing on her laptop screen. It wasn't the numbers that interested her, though. It was what they represented: power, control, and the unraveling of Garrett Carter's empire. The soft chime of her office phone interrupted her thoughts. She reached for it without looking. "Yes," she said curtly. "It's Dexter," came the voice on the other end. "We need to talk, now." Clara frowned but didn't hesitate. "Come up." She ended the call and stood, smoothing her tailored suit as she walked to the window. Below her, the city buzzed with its usual energy, a stark contrast to the turmoil brewing within Carter Technologies. Garrett's surprise return had complicated things, and Dexter's tone suggested the situation was becoming even more precarious. A moment later, Dexter entered, his expression tight with frustration. He closed the door behind him, his movements sharp and agitated. "He knows," Dexter began without preamble. Clara turned to face him, her features impassive. "Knows what?" "About Pacific Innovate, about the board. He confronted me today with some kind of evidence. I don't know how much he has, but he's getting close." For a moment, Clara said nothing, her eyes narrowing in thought. Finally, she moved to her desk, pulling out a slim leather-bound notebook. "We expected this," she said evenly, flipping through the pages. "Garrett's not the type to sit idle, especially not with his company at stake." "Expected?" Dexter snapped. "You didn't see him, Clara. He's not bluffing. If he exposes us—" "He won't," Clara interrupted, her voice cold and sharp. "Not if we stay ahead of him." Dexter ran a hand through his hair, his frustration evident. "And how do you propose we do that? He's already got Jack Donovan digging around. It's only a matter of time before they connect all the dots." Clara's lips curved into a thin smile. "Then we make sure the dots lead somewhere else. I'll handle Jack. You focus on keeping the rest of the board in line. We can't afford any defections." Dexter hesitated, then nodded reluctantly. "Fine. But if this goes south—" "It won't," Clara cut him off again. "Just do your part." As Dexter left, Clara leaned back in her chair, her mind already working through the next steps. She had anticipated Garrett's resilience, even admired it in a way. But admiration wouldn't stop her from doing what needed to be done. The stakes were too high, and she wasn't about to let sentiment or loyalty get in the way. She reached for her phone and dialed a number from memory. The voice on the other end was calm, almost detached. "Yes?" "It's Clara," she said. "We need to escalate. Garrett's closer than we thought." "Understood," the voice replied. "Leave it to me." Clara ended the call, her expression unreadable. She didn't need to ask for specifics. She trusted Jonathan to do what was necessary, even if it meant crossing lines Garrett wouldn't dare approach. Garrett sat at his desk, reviewing the notes Jack had sent over. The evidence against Dexter and Clara was damning but incomplete. He needed more, something irrefutable that would expose not only their betrayal, but also the larger plan involving Pacific Innovate. The stakes were rising, and Garrett felt the pressure with every passing hour. His phone buzzed, pulling him from his thoughts. It was Elodie. He picked up immediately. "What did you find?" "There's been another meeting," Elodie said, her voice hushed. "Clara and Dexter, they were talking about tightening the board and making sure no one breaks rank." Garrett exhaled slowly, his jaw tightening. "Did they say anything about Pacific Innovate?" "Not directly," Elodie replied, "but they mentioned someone named Jonathan. It sounded like he's pulling a lot of the strings." The name struck a nerve. Garrett leaned back, the pieces starting to click into place. Jonathan Carter, his estranged brother. The man who had disappeared from his life decades ago after their father's death had torn the family apart. Garrett had always suspected Jonathan harbored resentment, but he'd never imagined it would resurface like this. "Elodie," he said, his voice firm. "Thank you. Stay close to Clara, but be careful. If she catches wind of what you're doing, it won't be safe." "I will," she promised, before hanging up. Garrett stared out the window, his mind racing. Jonathan's involvement changed everything. This wasn't just about a corporate takeover, it was personal. His brother wasn't just trying to undermine him, he was trying to destroy him. Across the city, Jack Donovan sat in a dimly lit cafe, his laptop open in front of him. He had spent the past few hours combing through financial records, cross-referencing names, and following digital trails that most people wouldn't even notice. His efforts had led him to a series of offshore accounts, all linked back to Pacific Innovate, and now to Jonathan Carter. Jack typed a quick email to Garrett, attaching the evidence he had gathered. The account showed clear financial ties between Jonathan and both Dexter and Clara. Payments had been made regularly over the past year, each one disguised as a consulting fee or performance bonus. It was enough to prove collusion, but Jack wasn't finished yet. He had a feeling there was more to uncover. His instincts were confirmed when a new document surfaced in his search, a confidential email exchange between Jonathan and Pacific Innovate's CEO. The subject line read, "Carter Technologies Acquisition Timeline." Jack's pulse quickened as he opened the file. The contents outlined a detailed plan to destabilize Carter Technologies from within, using Dexter and Clara as pawns. The endgame was clear: force Garrett out, devalue the company, and acquire it for a fraction of its worth. Jack leaned back in his chair, his expression grim. He had seen plenty of corporate sabotage in his career, but this was on another level. Jonathan wasn't just trying to take over the company, he was orchestrating a calculated act of vengeance. Jack picked up his phone and dialed Garrett. When the CEO answered, Jack didn't waste any time. "I've found it," he said. "Everything we need to take them down." "Good," Garrett replied, his tone hard. "Send it over. We're running out of time." As Jack closed his laptop and prepared to leave, he couldn't shake the feeling that the fight was far from over. Garrett might have the evidence now, but going up against Jonathan and his allies would be a war, and wars were never won without casualties. Garrett sat at the head of the long conference table in the secure meeting room on the 38th floor of Carter Technologies. The heavy blinds were drawn, the room bathed in a muted glow from the overhead lights. Spread out before him were the documents Jack had sent, a damning collection of financial records, email correspondences, and evidence tying Dexter, Clara, and Jonathan to Pacific Innovate's orchestrated sabotage. He leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers as he reviewed the material for what felt like the 100th time. This was his company's lifeline, but it wasn't just about business anymore. It was about family, betrayal, and reclaiming the legacy he had fought to build. The discovery of Jonathan's involvement had reignited old wounds, ones Garrett thought he had buried long ago. The door opened and Sophia entered, clutching a tablet. Her expression was a mix of determination and unease. "Mr. Carter, I've completed the full audit," she said, placing the device on the table. "It's worse than we thought." Garrett gestured for her to sit, his voice calm but edged with urgency. "Show me." Sophia swiped through the files, pulling up a detailed breakdown of board member activities. I cross-referenced emails, meeting logs, and transaction histories. Clara and Dexter have been coordinating with Jonathan for over a year, but they've also been pulling in other board members. It looks like they've secured the loyalty of at least 3, enough to sway a vote if it comes to that. Garrett's eyes narrowed as he studied the names. "David Lawson, Sarah Mitchell, and Roger Haynes," he read aloud, the words dripping with disdain. "They've always been opportunists, but I didn't think they'd sink this low." Sophia hesitated before speaking. "There's more. Clara has been leveraging company resources to bribe key stakeholders. She's even been funneling money into offshore accounts to cover their tracks." Garrett exhaled sharply, his frustration evident. "And Jonathan? How does he fit into all this?" Sophia hesitated, then pulled up another document. "I found a series of communications between him and Pacific Innovate. He's not just funding their takeover bid, he's orchestrating it. Every move Clara and Dexter have made has been at his direction." The revelation hit Garrett harder than he expected. He had known Jonathan was involved, but seeing it laid out in black and white was a different matter. His brother wasn't just attacking his company, he was tearing at the very fabric of their shared history. "Good work, Sophia," he said finally, his voice steady despite the turmoil within. "This changes everything." Before she could respond, the door opened again and Jack Donovan entered, a confident smirk on his face. "I've got the cherry for this Sunday," he announced, dropping a flash drive onto the table. Direct evidence of Jonathan's plan, email exchanges, financial statements, and even a recording of a conversation between him and Pacific Innovate's CEO. It's all here. Garrett picked up the drive, his jaw tightening. We're running out of time. The board meeting is in 3 days, and if we don't act decisively, they'll push me out before I can make my case. Jack nodded. Then we hit them where it hurts. Call an emergency meeting before they're ready. Take control of the narrative. Garrett's lips pressed into a thin line as he considered the suggestion. They've stacked the board against me, Jack. Even with this evidence, I need more than facts. I need allies. Sophia's voice cut into the tense silence that had settled over the room. Mr. Carter, she began cautiously, I've been thinking about the board members. David Lawson, Sarah Mitchell, and Roger Haynes. They've always been motivated by personal gain, right? What if we use that against them? Garrett turned to her, intrigued. Go on. They're backing Clara and Dexter because they think it's the winning side, Sophia explained. But if we present them with irrefutable evidence that sticking with them will sink their reputations and possibly expose them to legal consequences, they might reconsider their loyalties. Jack leaned against the table, nodding. She's got a point. Most of these types don't have the stomach for scandal. We could leverage the evidence, make it clear that they're better off throwing Dexter and Clara under the bus. Garrett's mind raced. It was a risky move, but one with the potential to tip the scales in his favor. It could work, he admitted. If we approach them individually, show them the evidence without giving them time to coordinate a response, we might be able to peel them away. I can set up discreet meetings, Jack offered. One-on-one. We make them feel like they're saving themselves by turning against Clara and Dexter. Garrett nodded, his resolve hardening. Do it. But make sure they know this isn't a negotiation. They either align with me or they go down with the rest of them. Jack gave a small, approving smirk. Consider it done. Sophia, emboldened by the momentum, added, And what about the emergency meeting? If we move before Clara and Dexter can solidify their position, it'll throw them off balance. Garrett stood, pacing the room as he considered the options. The emergency meeting is a good idea, but we need to time it perfectly. If we strike too soon, they might recover before the final vote. Too late, and they'll have already executed their plan. He stopped, turning to Jack and Sophia. We'll schedule it for the day after tomorrow. That gives us enough time to meet with the swing votes and finalize our case against them. Once we've secured the majority, we'll move. Jack and Sophia nodded in unison, their determination mirroring Garrett's. The plan was risky, but the stakes left no room for hesitation. That evening, as the city lights twinkled against the darkened skyline, Garrett sat alone in his office, reviewing the evidence once more. His thoughts drifted to Jonathan, the brother who had once been his closest confidant. Their bond had been strong, forged in the crucible of their father's high expectations and relentless ambition. But years of resentment and betrayal had turned Jonathan into a stranger, and now an adversary. A soft knock at the door pulled him from his reverie. Elodie stepped in, her face pale but resolute. "I've got something you need to hear," she said, holding up her phone. "Clara had another meeting today. I recorded part of the conversation." Garrett gestured for her to play it. The audio crackled slightly, but Clara's voice was unmistakable. "We can't afford any more delays," Clara said, her tone clipped. "Jonathan expects results, and if Garrett makes his move first, we're done. Push the others harder if you have to." The recording ended, leaving the room in tense silence. Garrett's expression darkened. Clara's words confirmed his suspicions. Jonathan was driving the entire conspiracy, and the clock was ticking. "This is exactly what we needed," Garrett said, his voice steady but cold. "We're going to use this against her, and against Jonathan." Elodie nodded, her confidence growing. What's the plan? Garrett's eyes met hers, sharp with determination. We expose them, all of them, but first we make sure the board knows who they're really dealing with. As Elodie left the office, Garrett leaned back in his chair, a rare flicker of hope rising within him. For the first time in weeks, the path forward felt clear. The battle wasn't over, but he finally had the tools, and the allies, to fight back. The air in Garrett's office felt heavier than usual as he sat at his desk, staring at the phone. The number he had dialed so many times in the past felt foreign now, as though it belonged to a stranger. It had been over 20 years since he last spoke to Jonathan, and in that time, the gap between them had widened into a chasm filled with anger, betrayal, and silence. Now Garrett was about to bridge that chasm, not out of sentiment, but necessity. His finger hovered over the call button for a moment longer before he pressed it. The phone rang twice before a familiar voice answered, smooth and cold. Jonathan. Garrett's grip tightened on the phone. It's me. There was a pause, the weight of 2 decades hanging in the air. Garrett, Jonathan replied, his tone almost mocking. To what do I owe this unexpected pleasure? You know exactly why I'm calling, Garrett said, his voice steady but sharp. I know what you've been doing. The meetings, the money, the board manipulation, it all leads back to you. Jonathan chuckled softly, the sound more unsettling than reassuring. You've always been quick, brother, but this time you're late. The wheels are already in motion. I'm giving you a chance to back off, Garrett said firmly. This doesn't have to end the way you think it will. Back off? Jonathan repeated, amusement creeping into his voice. You don't get it, do you? This isn't about the company, Garrett. It never was. This is about balance, about finally leveling the playing field. Garrett's jaw tightened. Is that what you're telling yourself? That this is some noble crusade? Don't pretend this is anything more than revenge. Jonathan's voice dropped, the mockery replaced by venom. You took everything from me. The company, the family, even father's approval. All I've ever been is a shadow in your spotlight. This isn't revenge, Garrett. It's justice. Garrett leaned forward, his grip on the phone white-knuckled. You walked away. You made your choices, Jonathan. Don't rewrite history to justify what you're doing now. Believe what you want, Jonathan replied, his tone icy. But this is happening, Garrett, whether you like it or not. I suggest you prepare yourself for the inevitable. The line went dead. Garrett set the phone down slowly, his mind racing. The conversation had confirmed what he already knew. Jonathan wasn't going to stop. If anything, the call had only reinforced his resolve. But it also gave Garrett something valuable. Insight into his brother's motivations, his bitterness, and his weaknesses. Before he could dwell on it further, a knock at the door broke his thoughts. Elodie stepped inside, her face pale but determined. Mr. Carter, Jack just called. He's found something big. Garrett stood, motioning for her to continue. What is it? There's a paper trail linking Jonathan directly to the offshore accounts and to Clara's bribes. He thinks it's enough to turn the board against them. Garrett nodded, his resolve hardening. Good. It's time to use it. Garrett wasted no time. He grabbed his coat and followed Elodie to the secure conference room where Jack was waiting. As they entered, Jack stood by a large screen, a series of documents and charts projected behind him. The room buzzed with tension as Sophia joined them, her tablet in hand. This, Jack began, pointing to the screen, is the final nail in Jonathan's coffin. He clicked through the slides, showing the intricate web of transactions between Jonathan, Clara, and Dexter. The offshore accounts were meticulously detailed, with timestamps aligning perfectly with key decisions made within Carter Technologies. One particularly damning piece of evidence was an email thread between Jonathan and Pacific Innovate's CEO, discussing the exact steps to dismantle Garrett's control over the board. "This is good," Garrett said, his voice calm but firm. "But we need more than just numbers and emails. We need the board to see this as a threat to their own interests." Sophia chimed in. "That's where this comes in." She handed Garrett her tablet, displaying a timeline of Clara's and Dexter's actions, paired with the financial losses incurred by the company. "If we frame this as a direct attack on Carter Technologies, it'll force the board to reconsider. Their reputations and their wallets are on the line." Jack nodded. "Exactly. And this." He pulled up a recording of Clara's conversation, the one Elodie had captured. Her voice echoed through the room. "Jonathan expects results, and if Garrett makes his move first, we're done. Push the others harder if you have to." The words were a smoking gun, exposing Clara's desperation and Jonathan's influence. Garrett's expression darkened as he listened, but he forced himself to focus on the task ahead. "Here's the plan," Garrett said, addressing the group. "We'll call the emergency board meeting for tomorrow afternoon. Jack, you'll present the evidence to the key swing votes, David, Sarah, and Roger beforehand. Make them understand the consequences of staying with Clara and Dexter." He turned to Sophia. "I need you to prepare a clean, professional presentation for the meeting. Keep it concise but hard-hitting. Facts, figures, and that recording. Let the evidence speak for itself." Finally, his gaze landed on Elodie. "Your role is critical. I need you to keep an eye on Clara and Dexter. If they suspect what we're planning, they'll try to counter it. We can't let them control the narrative." Elodie nodded, her determination clear. "I won't let them out of my sight." Garrett straightened, his voice carrying the weight of a man who had been cornered but was now ready to fight. "This is it. Tomorrow, we take the fight to them. We expose the truth, and we remind the board who they're dealing with." The room fell silent for a moment, the gravity of the situation settling over them. Then Jack spoke, his tone laced with confidence. "We've got this, Garrett. They won't know what hit them." As the team dispersed to prepare for the battle ahead, Garrett remained behind, staring out the window at the city lights. His conversation with Jonathan replayed in his mind, the bitterness in his brother's voice cutting deeper than he cared to admit. This fight wasn't just about the company. It was about reclaiming everything he had built, everything Jonathan wanted to tear down. For the first time in weeks, Garrett allowed himself a small, grim smile. The odds were against him, but he wasn't going to back down. Not now. Not ever. The boardroom was eerily quiet as Garrett entered, his footsteps echoing against the polished hardwood floors. The table was already half filled with members, their murmured conversations stopping abruptly when they saw him. Garrett felt their eyes on him, some curious, some wary, and others coldly indifferent. He knew that most of them had been swayed by Clara and Dexter, but that was about to change. He moved purposefully to the head of the table, his presence commanding despite the tension that thickened the air. Dexter and Clara were seated on the far side, their expressions neutral, but their postures rigid. Clara gave him a polite smile, though the sharpness in her eyes betrayed her unease. "Garrett," she said smoothly, "I wasn't expecting you to call an emergency meeting today. Is everything all right?" Garrett met her gaze without flinching. "You'll see soon enough," he replied, his tone clipped. "We're waiting on 2 more." As if on cue, the door opened and David Lawson and Sarah Mitchell entered, both looking uncharacteristically nervous. Garrett noted their discomfort. Jack must have gotten to them. The last to arrive was Roger Haynes, his normally confident demeanor replaced with a sense of cautious curiosity. Perfect, Garrett thought. The groundwork had been laid. Now it was time to act. Once everyone was seated, Garrett stood, clasping his hands behind his back as he surveyed the room. "I called this meeting today to address a serious issue," he began, his voice firm but controlled. "Carter Technologies is under threat, not from the outside, but from within." A ripple of unease moved through the room. Dexter shifted slightly in his seat, while Clara remained perfectly still, her expression carefully neutral. Garrett gestured toward Sophia, who stood near the projector. She nodded and began displaying the slides they had prepared, each one meticulously detailing the evidence against Clara and Dexter. "As you can see," Garrett continued, "unauthorized transactions have been funneled through company accounts, benefiting outside interests. Those interests belong to Pacific Innovate, a direct competitor. These actions were orchestrated by individuals within this boardroom." A murmur rose among the members, growing louder as the details unfolded. Garrett's gaze never left Clara and Dexter. He watched as Clara's fingers tightened around her pen, her mask of calm slipping ever so slightly. "Furthermore," Garrett said, his voice cutting through the noise, "these betrayals were not random acts. They were part of a coordinated effort led by Jonathan Carter to destabilize this company and force a hostile takeover." At the mention of Jonathan's name, the room fell silent. Clara's composure cracked for a fraction of a second, her eyes darting to Dexter, who looked pale and cornered. "We have proof," Garrett continued, motioning for Sophia to play the recording. Clara's voice filled the room, the damning words echoing like a gavel striking a courtroom bench. "Jonathan expects results, and if Garrett makes his move first, we're done. Push the others harder if you have to." The room erupted into chaos. Voices overlapped as the board members turned to Clara and Dexter, their demands for explanations growing louder. Clara raised her hand, her voice cutting through the uproar with practiced authority. "Enough!" she snapped, her calm demeanor replaced by a sharp edge. The room fell silent as the board members turned their attention to her. "This is an obvious attempt by Garrett to undermine the board and sow discord," she said, her tone steady but laced with frustration. "Do you all really believe this fabrication? A recording? Financial records that could have been manipulated? He's trying to shift the blame for the company's recent troubles onto me and Dexter." Garrett didn't flinch. He let her words hang in the air for a moment before responding, his voice steady but sharp. "You're right about one thing, Clara. I am holding you accountable. But this isn't about shifting blame. It's about exposing the truth." He turned to the rest of the board. "Clara would have you believe that this evidence is fabricated. But ask yourselves this: who benefits most from the instability at Carter Technologies? Is it me, the man who built this company from the ground up? Or is it the people funneling money into offshore accounts and colluding with a competitor?" Roger Haynes cleared his throat, his voice hesitant but firm. "If this is true, Clara, why hasn't the board been informed about these transactions? Why keep it hidden?" Clara's mask of confidence faltered, but she quickly recovered. "Roger, let's not jump to conclusions. I'm as committed to this company as Garrett is. Any financial discrepancies are likely misunderstandings or errors that can be resolved internally." Garrett stepped forward, his presence commanding. "This isn't a misunderstanding. It's a deliberate attempt to dismantle this company, and Clara isn't acting alone. Dexter, care to explain your role in all of this?" All eyes turned to Dexter, who looked like a deer caught in headlights. He opened his mouth to speak, but faltered, his gaze darting to Clara as if searching for guidance. The silence was damning. "Let me make this simple," Garrett continued. "I have no intention of letting this board be used as pawns in Jonathan Carter's vendetta. You've all seen the evidence. You've heard the recording. Now it's up to you to decide whether you stand with this company or with the people trying to destroy it." The weight of his words settled over the room like a storm cloud. David Lawson and Sarah Mitchell exchanged uneasy glances, their earlier confidence in Clara visibly shaken. Roger leaned forward, his hands clasped tightly together. "What are you proposing, Garrett?" "I'm proposing we remove Clara and Dexter from their positions immediately," Garrett said, his tone unwavering. "We'll conduct a full investigation, but for now, they cannot remain in roles where they can continue to harm this company." Clara stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "This is outrageous. You have no authority to make such demands." Garrett met her glare with a cold smile. "Actually, Clara, I do. But let's put it to a vote, right here, right now." The room erupted again, the board members debating fiercely. Garrett remained silent, his confidence unshaken. He could see the tide turning. David, Sarah, and Roger were on the edge, their doubt about Clara's innocence clear. Finally, Roger raised a hand, his voice cutting through the chaos. "I vote to remove Clara and Dexter, effective immediately. The evidence speaks for itself." One by one, the other members followed suit, their hands raised as Garrett's case sealed their decision. Clara's face twisted with fury, but Dexter slumped in defeat, his shoulders sagging under the weight of the betrayal. "It's done," Garrett said firmly, his gaze sweeping across the room. "This company deserves better than deceit and sabotage. Now, let's focus on rebuilding." As Clara stormed out of the room, Garrett allowed himself a brief moment of satisfaction. But his thoughts quickly turned to Jonathan. This was only the first battle, and he knew the war was far from over. Garrett sat in his office, staring at the documents spread across his desk. The vote earlier that day had gone in his favor, but the victory felt hollow. Removing Clara and Dexter was only a small part of the battle. Jonathan was still out there, pulling strings, and Garrett knew his brother wouldn't back down after a minor setback. The sound of his phone buzzing pulled him from his thoughts. He grabbed it and saw Jack's name on the screen. "What do you have for me?" Garrett asked, skipping the pleasantries. "Plenty," Jack replied. "I've been following Jonathan's trail since the vote, and it looks like he's already making his next move. He's meeting with Pacific Innovate's CEO tonight at a private club downtown. If we're going to get ahead of him, this is our chance." Garrett's jaw tightened. "Do we have anyone on the inside?" "Not yet," Jack said. "But I've got a plan. It's risky, though." "I don't care about risk," Garrett snapped. "Tell me." Jack hesitated before answering. "I can get someone in there, someone Jonathan wouldn't recognize. They can record the conversation, maybe even get their hands on something tangible. But we'd need someone sharp, someone who can think on their feet." Garrett's mind immediately went to Elodie. She had proven herself resourceful and discreet, and her connection to the situation gave her a personal stake. But sending her into a situation like this was dangerous, and the thought made him hesitate. "Let me handle it," Garrett said finally. "I'll reach out to the right person." After ending the call, he sat back, running a hand through his hair. His gaze fell on the folder Elodie had brought him earlier, a collection of notes and observations she'd been quietly gathering about Clara and Dexter's movements. She had been instrumental in exposing them, but this was a different level of involvement. The decision weighed on him heavily as the office door opened and Elodie stepped inside. "You wanted to see me?" she asked, her tone professional but curious. Garrett gestured for her to sit. "Elodie, I have a proposition for you," he began. "It's not without risk, but it's critical to stopping Jonathan." Her brows furrowed, but she didn't flinch. "What is it?" He explained Jack's plan, laying out the stakes and the potential dangers. "You're one of the few people I trust with this," he finished. "But I won't pressure you. It's your choice." Elodie was silent for a moment, considering his words. Finally she nodded, her determination evident. "I'll do it. Jonathan and Pacific Innovate have to be stopped, and if this is how I can help, Then I'm in. Garrett felt a mix of relief and apprehension. Thank you, he said sincerely. Jack will brief you on the details. Be careful, Elodie. We can't afford to lose you. As she left the office, Garrett leaned back in his chair, the weight of the decision settling over him. He had just sent her into the lion's den, and all he could do now was hope she was ready for what lay ahead. Later that evening, Elodie stood outside the entrance to the exclusive club, the city lights casting a golden glow against the sleek, modern facade. She clutched her small black clutch tightly, her heart pounding beneath the calm exterior she projected. Jack had briefed her thoroughly on what to expect, but the gravity of the task weighed heavily on her. If she failed, the consequences for Garrett and for Carter Technologies would be catastrophic. She took a deep breath and stepped inside, her heels clicking softly against the marble floor. The receptionist greeted her with a practiced smile, and Elodie handed over the invitation Jack had managed to procure. It bore a false name, one tied to a shell identity he had prepared for just such an occasion. The receptionist scanned the card, nodded, and waved her through. The interior of the club was opulent, a mix of dark leather, polished brass, and muted lighting that created an atmosphere of exclusivity. Elodie scanned the room, spotting clusters of well-dressed individuals engaged in hushed conversations. Her target, however, was seated in a private booth near the back, partially obscured by a divider. Jonathan Carter and Pacific Innovate's CEO, a tall man with a slick demeanor named Richard Bellamy, were deep in discussion. Elodie made her way toward the bar, careful not to draw attention to herself. She ordered a drink, her eyes subtly watching the two men from the reflection in the polished mirror behind the bar. They leaned in close, their body language conspiratorial. Occasionally, Jonathan would gesture sharply, his expression one of controlled intensity. Jack's instructions echoed in her mind. Get close enough to record, but don't linger. If they notice you, leave immediately. Elodie took a steadying sip of her drink and glanced down at her clutch, where a slim recording device was concealed. Timing was everything. She waited until the server approached their booth to deliver a fresh round of drinks before she casually walked past, her pace unhurried but deliberate. As she moved by, she subtly pressed the hidden button on the side of her clutch to activate the recorder. She paused briefly at a nearby table, pretending to check her phone, ensuring the recorder captured their conversation clearly. Their voices filtered through the low hum of the room. Jonathan's tone was clipped, his words laced with disdain. "We're behind schedule, Bellamy," he said. "Garrett's more resilient than I expected. Clara and Dexter were supposed to handle this." Bellamy responded coolly, "Setbacks are inevitable. The key is to stay the course. The board is already fractured. One more push, and Carter Technologies will fall into our hands." Elodie felt her pulse quicken, her grip tightening on her clutch. The confirmation was damning. This wasn't just corporate maneuvering, it was a calculated attack. She began to move away, careful not to draw attention. But as she did, Jonathan's voice rose slightly, his next words cutting through the air like a blade. "Once Garrett's out of the picture, we'll restructure everything. No more legacy ties holding us back." Elodie froze for a split second, her mind racing. Out of the picture. The phrase carried a sinister implication, one that went beyond the business world. She forced herself to keep walking, her steps steady even as her heart raced. The morning sunlight streamed into Garrett's office, but the warmth of the day did little to temper the storm brewing inside. He leaned over the polished desk, listening intently to the recording Elodie had captured the night before. Jonathan's voice crackled through the speakers, each word dripping with venom and ambition. "We're behind schedule, Bellamy," Jonathan's voice said, sharp and impatient. "Garrett's more resilient than I expected. Clara and Dexter were supposed to handle this." Garrett's jaw tightened as he listened. Jonathan's contempt for him was palpable, and the calculated coldness in his tone sent a chill down Garrett's spine. When Bellamy's smooth voice replied, outlining the next phase of their strategy, Garrett's frustration grew. The recording played on, revealing their plans to dismantle Carter Technologies piece by piece. But it was Jonathan's final words that struck Garrett like a physical blow. Once Garrett's out of the picture, we'll restructure everything. No more legacy ties holding us back. The implication was clear. This wasn't just about the company. It was about eliminating Garrett entirely. He stopped the recording and sat back, his mind racing. The betrayal had cut deeply before, but now it felt like a personal attack, an attempt to erase everything he had built and everything he stood for. The man who had once been his brother was now his most dangerous enemy. Elodie sat across from him, her face pale but resolute. "I'm sorry I couldn't get more," she said, her voice steady despite the tension in the room. They were careful about what they said, but that last part, out of the picture, it felt personal. "It was personal," Garrett replied, his voice hard. "Jonathan doesn't just want the company. He wants revenge." Jack Donovan leaned against the doorframe, his arms crossed as he watched the exchange. "He's desperate," Jack said. "That's good for us. Desperate people make mistakes." "Or they take risks," Garrett countered, his gaze fixed on the recorder. "We need to move fast. This gives us the leverage we need, but if Jonathan feels cornered, there's no telling what he might do." Sophia entered the room, holding a stack of documents. "I've compiled the presentation for the board," she said, placing the papers on Garrett's desk. "It includes the recording and a timeline of their actions. It's airtight." Garrett nodded, grateful for her meticulous work. "Good. We'll need every ounce of leverage we have." Elodie shifted in her seat. "What's the plan?" Garrett leaned forward, his eyes blazing with determination. "We call an emergency shareholders meeting. This goes beyond the board now. The shareholders need to know what's happening, and they need to hear it directly from me." Jack raised an eyebrow. "You're going public with this?" "I don't have a choice," Garrett replied. "If I let this stay in the shadows, Jonathan will keep playing his game. Exposing him is the only way to cut him off at the knees." The team spent the next several hours finalizing the details of the emergency shareholders meeting. Garrett worked closely with Sophia, ensuring every piece of evidence was presented clearly and decisively. The timeline of betrayal, the financial manipulations, and the recorded conversation between Jonathan and Bellamy painted a damning picture. It was enough to sway even the most skeptical stakeholders, if presented correctly. Jack, meanwhile, was working his own angle. He had reached out to a trusted contact within the media, preparing to leak the story if Jonathan tried to manipulate the narrative. "A controlled release," Jack had explained. "If we stay ahead of him, we can control the fallout." By the time the preparations were complete, the sun had dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the city. Garrett stood by the window, his reflection staring back at him. His face was lined with fatigue, but his resolve remained unshaken. He had spent his life fighting for Carter Technologies, and he wasn't about to let Jonathan destroy it. Elodie entered the office quietly, a hesitant expression on her face. "Mr. Carter, there's something else," she said, holding up her phone. "After last night, I did some digging into Jonathan's recent activities. It looks like he's been meeting with several high-profile figures outside of Pacific Innovate. Politicians, lobbyists, even some of our major competitors." Garrett turned to face her, his brow furrowed. "What are you saying?" "I think he's building a coalition," Elodie replied. "If he can't take Carter Technologies directly, he's setting himself up to dismantle it from the outside. Regulatory pressure, market manipulation, whatever it takes to weaken us." Garrett's stomach turned. Jonathan wasn't just playing one angle, he was creating multiple paths to victory. It was a level of cunning that Garrett hadn't fully anticipated, and it made the stakes even higher. "Good work, Elodie," Garrett said, his voice steady despite the weight of the revelation. "We'll need to address this too, but first we deal with the shareholders." As Elodie left, Garrett picked up the phone and called Jack. "We need to prepare for a broader fight," he said without preamble. "Jonathan isn't just targeting the board, he's moving on multiple fronts." "I'll dig deeper," Jack replied. "But this means we need to win tomorrow, Garrett. If the shareholders back you, it'll cut off his momentum." "They'll back me," Garrett said firmly. "They have to." The next morning, the shareholders' meeting was held in the company's largest conference hall. The tension was palpable as stakeholders filed in, their whispers echoing off the high ceilings. Garrett stood at the front of the room, his team seated nearby. Elodie, Sophia, and Jack were positioned strategically, ready to assist if necessary. As the room settled, Garrett stepped forward, his presence commanding despite the undercurrent of unease. He began with a brief overview of the company's recent struggles, laying the groundwork before diving into the evidence. "We are at a crossroads," he said, his voice steady but forceful. "Carter Technologies has been under attack, not from competitors, but from those who should have been its protectors. Members of our own board have conspired to weaken this company, and they've done so under the direction of someone who once called himself family." He pressed a button on the remote, and the recording of Jonathan's conversation filled the room. The words hung in the air like a storm cloud, leaving no room for doubt about the intentions behind the plot. Gasps and murmurs spread through the crowd as the evidence continued to unfold. When the presentation ended, Garrett stood silently for a moment, letting the gravity of the situation sink in. "This is not just about protecting a company," he said finally. "It's about standing up to greed, betrayal, and those who would tear us down for their own gain. I'm asking for your support, not for me, but for the future of Carter Technologies." The room erupted into applause, the tension breaking as the shareholders voiced their approval. Garrett's heart swelled with a mix of relief and determination. The battle wasn't over, but the tide was turning. The room was quiet now, the shareholders having filed out after the resounding vote in Garrett's favor. He remained standing at the head of the table, his hands braced against the polished wood. The adrenaline that had carried him through the presentation was fading, replaced by a simmering tension. He had won this battle, but the war was far from over. Jack entered the room, his expression a mix of satisfaction and concern. "That went about as well as we could have hoped," he said, sliding into a chair. "But Jonathan's not going to take this lying down." Garrett nodded, his jaw tight. "He's already playing a longer game." Elodie found evidence of him aligning with external forces, competitors, politicians, anyone who can help him dismantle us from the outside. Jack frowned. "That complicates things. If he's building alliances, it's not just about taking over Carter Technologies anymore. He's trying to destroy your legacy entirely." "It's personal," Garrett said, his voice low but firm. "It always has been." Sophia joined them, her tablet in hand. "I've been monitoring media chatter," she said, sliding into the chair opposite Jack. "It's starting to spread. Rumors about instability at Carter Technologies. Nothing concrete yet, but it's clear Jonathan's working to control the narrative." Garrett exhaled sharply. "Then we have to get ahead of him. Jack, do you have anything on his external contacts? We need to know who he's pulling into this." Jack nodded, opening his laptop and pulling up a file. "I've got a list of names. Executives from rival companies, lobbyists, even a few journalists. He's casting a wide net, but one name stands out: Senator Graham." He turned the screen toward Garrett. "She's been vocal about corporate accountability and has a history of targeting big players in the tech world. If Jonathan has her on his side, she could cause a lot of trouble." Sophia's brow furrowed. "How do we counter that?" Publicly opposing her could backfire. "We don't oppose her," Garrett said decisively. "We bring her over to our side. If we can show her Jonathan's true motives, how he's manipulating this entire situation for personal gain, she might turn against him." Jack smirked. "A bold move, but it could work, especially if we have undeniable proof." "I'll need to meet with her directly," Garrett said. "Jack, set it up. Sophia, prepare a package of evidence, focused, concise, and damning." Sophia nodded, already typing notes into her tablet. "Consider it done." As the team dispersed to carry out their tasks, Garrett remained in the room, staring out at the city skyline. The battle had shifted to a new front, one that required as much strategy and finesse as brute force. Jonathan was cunning, but Garrett wasn't about to let him win. The following evening, Garrett arrived at a private lounge where the meeting with Senator Graham had been arranged. Jack had secured the venue to ensure confidentiality, and Sophia had prepared a meticulously crafted presentation that highlighted Jonathan's manipulative tactics and the broader threat he posed, not just to Carter Technologies, but to the industry as a whole. Garrett adjusted his cufflinks as the senator entered, her sharp eyes scanning the room. Senator Graham was a formidable presence, her reputation as a staunch advocate for corporate transparency and ethical practices preceding her. She offered a polite but measured smile as she extended a hand. "Mr. Carter," she said, her tone neutral, "I'll admit, I was surprised to receive your invitation." "Thank you for meeting me," Garrett replied, shaking her hand firmly. "I believe we have a shared interest in addressing something that goes far beyond my company." They sat across from each other, the tension palpable but controlled. Garrett wasted no time, diving straight into the details. He outlined the evidence against Jonathan, presenting the financial records, email exchanges, and recordings that painted a clear picture of his brother's orchestration of the sabotage against Carter Technologies. Senator Graham's expression remained unreadable as she reviewed the materials. When the recording of Jonathan's conversation with Bellamy played, her lips tightened slightly, the only indication that she was registering the gravity of the situation. "I can see why you're concerned," she said finally, setting the tablet down. "But you must understand, Mr. Carter, my priority is ensuring that companies like yours operate transparently and ethically. If there's corruption within your organization, I have an obligation to act on it." Garrett leaned forward, his voice calm but firm. "And I respect that, Senator, which is why I'm bringing this to you. Jonathan is leveraging people within my company and external forces to destabilize us, not for the sake of accountability, but for his own vendetta. He's using regulatory pressure and public opinion as weapons, and if he succeeds, it won't stop with Carter Technologies. He'll set a precedent that could harm countless others." Senator Graham studied him for a moment, her gaze sharp and discerning. "You're asking me to take your side in what appears to be a very personal battle. Why should I believe you're any different from your brother?" Garrett's eyes met hers, unwavering. "Because I'm not asking you to take my side. I'm asking you to look at the evidence and make your own judgment. My brother is a threat, not just to me, but to the integrity of the system you've spent your career defending." The senator leaned back, her expression thoughtful. "I'll review this further," she said finally. "If what you're saying is true, then Jonathan Carter may have more to answer for than you realize." "Thank you," Garrett said, his voice carrying a note of relief. "That's all I ask." As she left, Garrett remained seated, his thoughts racing. The meeting had gone as well as he could have hoped, but it was far from a guarantee. Senator Graham's decision would play a pivotal role in the next phase of the battle, and he could only hope that the truth would be enough to sway her. Back at Carter Technologies, Jack was waiting with an update. "I've got eyes on Jonathan," he said as Garrett entered the office. "He's meeting with Bellamy again tomorrow. This time it's at one of their facilities, not a public venue." Garrett's jaw tightened. "What are they planning?" "I don't know yet," Jack replied. "But whatever it is, we need to be ready." "We will be," Garrett said, his voice steely. "Jonathan thinks he's untouchable. It's time we prove him wrong." The tension in the air was palpable as Garrett reviewed the latest intelligence Jack had gathered. Jonathan's meeting with Richard Bellamy was scheduled for that evening, and this time it was taking place at one of Pacific Innovate's private facilities, a fortified corporate stronghold far from prying eyes. The location alone suggested that whatever was being planned was critical to their strategy. "Do we have a way in?" Garrett asked, his voice steady despite the storm of emotions brewing within him. Jack nodded, tapping a map spread out on Garrett's desk. "The facility is heavily secured, but there's a service entrance on the east side. Low traffic, minimal guards. If we're going to plant a device or gather intel, that's our best bet." Garrett frowned. "And the risks?" "High," Jack admitted. "If they catch anyone snooping around, Jonathan will tighten security even more. But if we pull this off, we might finally get the leverage we need to end this." Sophia entered the room, her tablet in hand. "I've been analyzing their communication patterns," she said, placing the device on the table. "It looks like tonight's meeting is a pivotal moment. If we can intercept the discussion, or better yet record it, we'll have undeniable proof of their plans." Garrett's eyes flicked to Elodie, who stood silently near the corner of the room. Her presence was calm but resolute, a testament to the trust she had earned throughout the ordeal. "Elodie," he said, turning to her, "I know you've already taken a lot of risks, but I need someone on the inside tonight. Someone they won't suspect." Elodie straightened, her gaze meeting his without hesitation. "Tell me what you need," Jack intervened. "I'll be nearby to guide you. The goal is simple. Get close enough to record the conversation and then get out. No heroics." Garrett nodded, appreciating Jack's pragmatism. "This is the final stretch," he said. "If we succeed tonight, we can dismantle Jonathan's network for good." As the evening descended, Elodie found herself standing in the shadows outside the Pacific Innovate facility. The low hum of industrial equipment filled the air, and the faint glow of security lights illuminated the sprawling complex. Jack's voice crackled in her earpiece. "You're clear to move. East entrance, 2 guards. Keep it quiet." Elodie slipped past the perimeter, her heart pounding but her steps sure. She wore a utility uniform Jack had provided, blending in as just another service worker on the night shift. Reaching the east entrance, she spotted the guards Jack had mentioned. One of them was engrossed in his phone, while the other idly scanned the area. "Elodie," Jack's voice came again. "There's a utility corridor to your right. Use it as cover." She nodded, slipping into the shadows and maneuvering through the corridor. The path led her closer to the meeting room, where voices grew louder, their words muffled but urgent. She pressed herself against the wall, her hand gripping the small recording device hidden in her pocket. "Now," Jack's voice urged softly. Elodie took a steadying breath and moved closer, careful to keep out of sight. From her vantage point, she could see Jonathan and Bellamy seated at a table, their expressions tense as they reviewed a series of documents spread before them. Elodie crouched low behind a storage unit, her position obscured by the dim lighting of the facility's utility corridor. She carefully pulled the recording device from her pocket, angling it toward the meeting room. Her heart pounded as Jonathan's voice came through clearly, his tone sharp and commanding. "This is it, Richard," Jonathan said, tapping the documents in front of him. "Once we finalize these terms, Carter Technologies will be crippled. Garrett may have won over the shareholders for now, but with this, we'll control the market. And him." Richard Bellamy leaned back in his chair, exuding an air of confidence. "And you're certain the remaining board members won't interfere?" "They won't," Jonathan replied, his tone cold. "They've been compensated well, and the rest are too afraid of what I might do to step out of line. The next board meeting will go exactly as planned. Garrett won't see it coming." Elodie's grip tightened on the recorder. The conversation was damning, but she needed more. She leaned forward slightly, straining to catch every word. "And what about Garrett himself?" Bellamy asked, his voice laced with curiosity. "He's proven to be resilient." Jonathan's chuckle was devoid of humor. "Resilience only gets you so far. Once the regulatory pressure hits, he'll have no choice but to step down. And if that doesn't work—" He trailed off, his silence more chilling than words. Bellamy smirked. "You're ruthless, Jonathan. I like that." Elodie's stomach churned. The implications were clear. Jonathan was prepared to go beyond corporate maneuvers to take Garrett out of the picture entirely. The stakes weren't just professional anymore. They were personal, and they were deadly. As the two men continued their conversation, Elodie adjusted her position to get a clearer angle. But the faint scrape of her shoe against the floor echoed in the otherwise quiet space. Jonathan's head snapped up, his eyes narrowing as he scanned the room. "Did you hear that?" he asked, his tone sharp. Bellamy glanced toward the corridor, his brow furrowing. "You have security here, don't you?" Jonathan didn't answer. He stood abruptly, his movements deliberate and precise. "Check it out," he ordered Bellamy. "If there's someone here, we can't take any chances." Elodie's pulse quickened. She slipped back into the shadows, clutching the recorder tightly. Jack's voice came through her earpiece, calm but urgent. "Get out now. They're on to you." Moving as quietly as she could, Elodie retraced her steps toward the utility corridor. The sound of approaching footsteps grew louder behind her, and she quickened her pace, resisting the urge to break into a run. "Who's there?" Jonathan's voice boomed, his tone dangerous. "Show yourself." Elodie reached the service exit just as the door to the meeting room slammed open. She ducked into the shadows outside, slipping through the perimeter and back into the safety of the night. Her heart pounded as she moved quickly toward Jack's parked car. As she climbed inside, Jack hit the gas, the facility shrinking in the rearview mirror. "Did you get it?" he asked, glancing at her. Elodie nodded, holding up the recorder. "Everything." Jack smirked, his confidence returning. "Good. Let's take Jonathan down." The boardroom buzzed with tension as the members filed in, their hushed conversations underscored by a sense of anticipation. Garrett stood at the head of the table, his expression calm but resolute. This was it, the final battle for Carter Technologies. Elodie, Jack, and Sophia were seated nearby, their presence a reminder of the unwavering support that had brought him to this moment. The meeting began with formalities, but Garrett wasted no time diving into the heart of the matter. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice steady and commanding, "I've called this meeting to address a threat that goes beyond any single individual in this room. It's a threat to the integrity of this company and everything we've built together." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle over the room. With a nod to Sophia, the projector flickered to life, displaying the evidence they had meticulously compiled. Financial documents, email exchanges, and the damning recording Elodie had captured the night before appeared on the screen. Gasps and murmurs rippled through the board as Jonathan's voice echoed through the room. "We're behind schedule, Bellamy," the recording played, each word sharp and incriminating. "Once we finalize these terms, Carter Technologies will be crippled. Garrett may have won over the shareholders for now, but with this, we'll control the market. And him." The room fell silent as the recording continued, culminating in Jonathan's chilling declaration. "Once Garrett's out of the picture, we'll restructure everything. No more legacy ties holding us back." When the recording ended, Garrett faced the board. "This is the man who has been orchestrating the sabotage of our company. My own brother, Jonathan Carter. His actions have not only endangered this business, but also every one of you who trusted in its future." The silence that followed Garrett's statement was thick, the weight of the evidence leaving no room for doubt. Board members exchanged uneasy glances, their expressions ranging from shock to outrage. Finally, Roger Haynes spoke up, his voice heavy with anger. "This is beyond betrayal, Garrett. This is criminal." "Agreed," Sarah Mitchell added, her tone firm. "If Jonathan's actions go unchecked, we're all at risk, not just financially but legally." Clara, who had returned to the board as a silent observer following her removal, shifted uncomfortably in her seat. She opened her mouth to speak, but Garrett cut her off with a sharp look. "This is not the time for excuses or damage control," he said coldly. "What matters now is taking decisive action to protect Carter Technologies." He turned to Jack, who handed him a prepared motion. Garrett placed it on the table, his voice steady as he addressed the board. "I'm formally requesting a unanimous vote to remove Jonathan Carter from any remaining influence over this company. Additionally, I'm calling for legal action to hold him accountable for the damage he's caused." The room murmured in agreement, and one by one, hands raised in support of the motion. When the final vote was cast, Garrett felt a wave of relief wash over him. This chapter was coming to a close, but there was one more step to take. The double doors of the boardroom swung open, and two plainclothes officers entered, their presence a stark reminder of the severity of the situation. Garrett had alerted the authorities ahead of time, knowing this moment was inevitable. Jonathan's actions weren't just unethical, they were illegal, and justice had to be served. As the officers escorted Jonathan into the room, his expression was defiant, but the flicker of unease in his eyes didn't escape Garrett's notice. "This isn't over," Jonathan hissed as he passed by. Garrett's gaze didn't waver. "Yes, it is," he said simply. The meeting concluded, and as the board members dispersed, Garrett remained behind, gazing out the window at the city skyline. Elodie approached, her expression soft but resolute. "You did it," she said. Garrett turned to her, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "We did it. This wasn't just my fight. It was ours." Elodie nodded, a sense of peace settling over her. "What's next?" Garrett looked out at the horizon, the weight of the past few months finally lifting. "We rebuild. Together." The sun dipped below the skyline, casting the city in a warm glow. For the first time in months, Garrett felt a sense of closure. The battles had been hard fought, but the victory was complete. Carter Technologies was safe, and the legacy he had built, though scarred, was intact. As he stood there, surrounded by the people who had stood by him, Garrett knew one thing for certain. The future, no matter how uncertain, was his to shape.